This is the story of women Mao claimed to liberate, and the brutal reality hidden behind that promise. A story of young girls turned into labor machines, their bodies broken in fields, factories, and furnaces, their loyalties tested through violence and fear. Mao said women hold up half the sky, but under his rule, they carried the weight of his failures. Tonight, in Dictators Files, The Dark Side of Power, we open the case of the Iron Girls and the gender revolution that became exploitation. Mao began with a slogan, a simple line that sounded like liberation. Women hold up half the sky. But under Mao, every slogan hid a command. Every promise hid a price. Historian Wang Zheng writes that Mao's so-called gender revolution was never about women's rights. It was about extracting labor, loyalty, and obedience from half the population he hadn't yet exploited. So the party moved fast. Cadres swept through villages, telling women they were equal now, that they were needed for the revolution, that Mao had opened the door to a new future. But the door led one direction, into the state's hands. Girls barely 15 were reassigned from school to labor brigades, widows ordered into collective farms to prove class consciousness. Mothers told childcare was a bourgeois luxury. Equality meant nothing except this: your body belongs to the revolution. One young woman in Hebei later recalled, "I thought Chairman Mao wanted us to rise. I didn't know he meant we must rise before dawn, every day, and never fall." Mao's trap was set. Women believed they were being lifted, but they were being prepared for the furnace, for the fields, for the violence to come. The great leap forward was collapsing, crops failing, furnaces devouring entire villages, millions starving. Mao did not slow down. He doubled the quotas and doubled the suffering. Historian Xueping Zhong notes that the party created the Iron Girl not as empowerment, but as propaganda to hide the regime's desperation. If China lacked manpower, Mao would manufacture it. The state needed symbols, women who could be photographed breaking their bodies for Mao. They chose Liang Jun, China's first female tractor driver. Her freezing hands wrapped around metal levers, while party photographers demanded she smile through bleeding knuckles. Guo Fenglian, the girl from Dazhai who hauled stones, built terraces, and became Mao's proof that women can do anything men do. No one photographed her injuries. No one recorded the nights she collapsed in pain. They were not chosen because they wanted to lead. They were chosen because their suffering was useful. Cadres enforced the transformation. Cut your hair. Stop dressing like a woman. Work harder, then harder again. Femininity became a crime. Exhaustion became loyalty. Silence became survival. Girls were marched from dormitories to steelworks, from rice paddies to construction sites, from youth straight into the machinery of Mao's ambition. One worker recalled, "We didn't know if we were strong or if we were simply afraid to stop." The Iron Girl was not born. She was engineered by a dictator who needed more bodies and didn't care whose he broke. By 1959, the Iron Girl was no longer an image. She was an expectation, a demand, a threat. Mao's orders were clear. Women must match male quotas, not in spirit, in flesh. Historian Frank Dikötter, in his study of the Great Leap Forward, writes, "Women were driven to physical collapse to meet targets designed for propaganda, not for human bodies." This was not accidental cruelty. It was engineered. Women were ordered to haul 500 to 700 pounds of earth a day, swing hammers until their hands split, forge steel in toxic blazing furnaces, labor 12 to 16 hours without rest. If they slowed down, cadres shouted, "Pain is weakness, weakness is disloyalty." Pregnant women were not exempt. Sick women were not excused. Injured women were not believed. One woman in Henan fainted carrying soil for a dam. The brigade captain kicked her awake and barked, "Stand up! Mao needs you!" She miscarried the next morning. She returned to work the same day, because absence meant suspicion, and suspicion meant punishment. Posters showed iron girls smiling beside furnaces. In reality, they inhaled ash that scarred their lungs for life. Posters showed iron girls lifting steel beams. In reality, their spines collapsed under weight meant for 2 men. Posters showed iron girls heroic and strong. In reality, many died unnamed, unrecorded, unacknowledged. Mao praised their spirit. He did not see their bodies. He did not need to. Their suffering proved his ideology. Their exhaustion fed his fantasy of endless progress. Their broken bones were the foundation of his political theater. They were not workers. They were fuel. And Mao fed the fire without ever looking back. By 1966, Mao needed something more than labor. He needed chaos. He needed obedience sharpened into a blade. So he turned the iron girls into something new. Instruments of political violence. Historian Roderick MacFarquhar, in Mao's Last Revolution, writes, "Mao empowered radical young women to intensify terror and shame those who hesitated." The dictator knew exactly what he was doing. Iron girls were disciplined, exhausted, and loyal. Perfect material for the Cultural Revolution. Cadres told them, "A true revolutionary must destroy the old world. A soft heart is counter-revolutionary. Hit harder, prove yourself." And they did, because refusing meant punishment. Girls who once hauled steel now hauled people into struggle sessions. Across China, young women were pushed onto stages of violence. Song Binbin, a star student at Beijing Normal University's girls' school, became one of the earliest female icons of the Red Guards. Her school was the site where Principal Bian Zhongyun was beaten to death by students, an attack historians MacFarquhar and Schoenhals describe as the opening act of mass terror in 1966. Song was then brought to Tiananmen Square, where Mao personally accepted her Red Guard armband, a moment that signaled the regime's approval of female-led violence. At Tsinghua University, Tan Hulan led radical female factions in brutal purges, ordering attacks on teachers, smashing cultural relics, and commanding street-level violence as Mao urged the Red Guards to bombard the headquarters. These women were not empowered. They were weaponized, trained to enforce Mao's political war with their fists, their voices, and their fear. Mao praised the Iron Girls in public. He demanded their suffering in private. And when the work was done, when the violence had served its purpose, the cost fell entirely on them. Historian Gail Hershatter, who documented women's lives under Mao, writes, "The state demanded superhuman labor from women while denying the injuries that labor caused." Party celebrated the myth. The women lived the consequences. Years of hauling stone, steel, and earth left Iron Girls with crushed vertebrae, chronic lung damage, torn ligaments, permanent pelvic injuries, infertility from untreated trauma. These weren't accidents. They were the expected outcome of Mao's quotas. A former iron girl from Shanxi described waking up with numb legs, crawling out of bed, then walking into the fields. Because if you didn't show up, they wrote your name on the wall as a warning. Pain wasn't treated. Pain was political. Some iron girls carried another wound. One Mao never acknowledged. During the Cultural Revolution, many were forced to beat teachers, neighbors, even family members. One woman from Beijing said quietly in an interview decades later, "I broke a man's arm because the cadre pointed at him. I still see his face. He forgave me. I didn't forgive myself." These weren't monsters. These were girls, pushed into violence by a dictator who rewarded brutality and punished hesitation. As their bodies deteriorated, iron girls became inconvenient. Cadres accused them of ideological weakness. Some were forced into self-criticism sessions because they could no longer lift the weights Mao demanded. One woman in Henan who developed spinal damage was ordered to kneel in front of the brigade and confess she lacked revolutionary will. Her injury didn't shame the revolution shamed her. Mao never apologized, never acknowledged the damage, never offered relief. The iron girls were tools, useful when strong, guilty when broken, forgotten when the state no longer needed their bodies. Their suffering wasn't a side effect of Mao's policies. It was the design, a revolution that ate everything and everyone who served it. When Mao finished using the iron girls as labor, as symbols, as weapons, he discarded them with the same brutality he used to shape them. Historian Tani Barlow, who studied gender under Mao, writes, "Maoist equality was never a commitment. It was a temporary tactic. When no longer useful, it was simply withdrawn. And withdrawal under Mao meant abandonment." By the early 1970s, Mao shifted focus to elite political struggles. Lin Biao, Zhou Enlai, the Gang of Four. The Iron Girls no longer served the theater of revolution. Quotas dropped, propaganda shifted, campaign slogans disappeared. The women who had carried steel on their backs were now told nothing. No praise, no support, no future, just silence. For the party, a woman injured in Mao's service was not a veteran. She was a burden. Cadres labeled injured iron girls as lazy, undisciplined, ideologically impure. One iron girl from Hebei, who could no longer lift heavy loads, was removed from her brigade and reassigned to sweeping latrines. Her brigade leader told her, "The chairman needs strong women. If you're not strong, you're nothing." She had broken her spine for Mao. Mao had no use for her anymore. Some iron girls were even targeted, denied food rations for lack of productivity, forced into self-criticism for bourgeois weakness, labeled troublemakers when they sought medical care, accused of corruption when they couldn't meet quotas. They weren't just forgotten, they were blamed. The dictator who demanded strength now punished the wounds he had created. A former iron girl from Shandong summed it in one sentence: "We gave Mao our youth. He gave us scars." Mao did not liberate them. He consumed them. And the moment their usefulness ended, his revolution erased them, as if their suffering had never existed. In a dictatorship, loyalty is not rewarded. It is exploited. And when it breaks, it is thrown away. They called it liberation. Mao called it equality. But the Iron Girls left behind a different record, a record written in scars. Historian Elaine Jeffries, studying gender in Maoist China, writes, Mao's revolution mobilized women when useful and discarded them when their bodies and loyalty were spent. It wasn't policy failure, it was policy design. The Iron Girls were created to fill shortages, to prove ideology, to enforce terror. They carried steel. They attacked class enemies. They worked until their bodies collapsed. And when they broke, Mao moved on. No compensation, no recognition, no apology. The women who hauled mountains for him were left with broken spines, ruined lungs, shattered futures. Their pain wasn't accidental. It was the cost Mao accepted to feed his revolution. After the campaign shifted, the party buried their history. The posters disappeared. The slogans vanished. But the women didn't. They lived with the memories of violence they were forced to commit, of labor that destroyed their bodies, of loyalty that meant nothing in the end. One survivor said, "We believed we were iron, but iron does not bleed." Mao promised women they would hold up half the sky. But he never meant freedom. He meant labor. He meant obedience. He meant bodies for the revolution. The Iron Girls were not a triumph of equality. They were evidence of exploitation. Their legacy is the truth dictators fear. When a leader claims your body for the nation, he is not offering liberation. He is asking for sacrifice, with no intent to repay it. And in Mao's China, sacrifice was endless, and the Iron Girls were consumed.